Advertising Council Australia would like to begin by acknowledging and paying our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land from which we broadcast today. ACA would also like to acknowledge their culture of storytelling through art, dance and music, and we pay respect to the elders past, present and future on other lands throughout all communities who might be participating today.
Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever it is, where you're coming from. Today, we're very proud to be talking about the latest release of Australian Advertising Effectiveness Rules. The report this time is called To Esov and Beyond. A special welcome to our esteemed presenters, Karen Nelson-Field, Peter Field and Rob Brittain, and of course to my co-host today, the wonderful Kim Portrait, CEO of Think TV. And my name, for those that don't know me, is Tony Hale. I'm the CEO of Advertising Council Australia. So just a couple of quick things before we start. This webinar is being recorded, just so you know, and we'll be doing some minor edits and loading it up onto our website early next week for those that want to see. And there's a Q&A button. There's a Q&A button down the bottom right that you might be able to see. Ask questions at any time through. We'll have a session at the end, but load up your questions as you see. Don't be shy, and we'll get to them all. So just a bit of background about Australian Advertising Effectiveness Rules. I suppose it started a few years ago when Peter Field, we convinced Peter to come over to Australia for the first time. And I was always very jealous on behalf of the Ad Council as to why the IPA were always able to issue these fantastic reports. And at one stage we had both Les and Peter over for the long and the short of it. And after haranguing Peter, I think he thought he could probably dismiss me by saying you need to set up your own database. Well, in fact, we recruited Rob Brittain, got the help of Peter, and that's exactly what we've done, which has been fantastic because this is the third report that we've done. In 2019, we issued our first insights into the database with our first volume. Last year, we managed to publish Winning or Losing in a Recession. And this year is probably the most exciting of the lot, To Esov and Beyond. And we've been able to do that because our database now has over 300 FE entrants in there, which gives us a lot of rich data that we can draw our insights. So copies of the report, this particular report and the Nickable charts will be loaded up onto our website after this, so you'll be able to download them straight away. And this webinar, as I said earlier, will be made available early next week. But none of this would have been possible without the great support of our partner in this particular project, which is Think TV. They've been with us from the start. And I'd like to pass over to Kim Portrait, who I imagine, amongst other things, is going to formally introduce our panelists.
Thanks, Tony. And welcome everybody, no matter where you are, what time zone. We are so excited to be part of this project. When Tony spoke to me years ago now about the importance of, being effective with the work that we do, it was a no-brainer for us to get involved. So we share the same views on what's important, and this report is absolutely stunning. I think it's going to change literally every person's life that reads it. Onto the business, because I know it's late at night. I hope some of you are sitting, well, for those of you that it's evening, I hope you're sitting with a glass of Shiraz. For those that aren't, I hope strong, stiff coffee is sitting in front of you. Today, we will be hearing from the authors of the report, and I'll introduce them shortly. There'll be probably around 45 minutes of content, although I know each of these people well, and they do get excited. So if we go a little bit over, that may happen. And then after that 45 minutes of content, we'll do around 15 minutes of questions. But again, I've attended these webinars before, and I know questions can go much longer, which is perfectly fine. We have the time if you've got the questions. So it's going to be a fantastic hour or so. Let's get started by introducing the authors of the report, and I'll start with Peter Field. Peter is a renowned author, public speaker and consultant who's worked in the field, no pun intended, of advertising effectiveness for many, many years. He's recognised globally. In fact, he and his partner in crime, I'll call Les Binet, are commonly referred to as the godfathers of effectiveness, and that's true, he is. Although I would suggest that Mark Rittson's epithet on him being Oscar Wilde of the industry is potentially something that I would like to see become equally enduring. He has certainly written numerous articles over the years, and it's his actual words from last April that really resonated for me, which is, and I think relevant for us tonight as well too, the coming months are going to test everyone. We are in uncharted territory, and the brands that hold their nerve and their share of voice will ultimately triumph. We're super fortunate to have Peter joining us from London today, especially since he's not a morning person and it is morning in London. And we're looking forward to what he's got to say in terms of the content of the report. Which brings me to our local homegrown godfather of effectiveness, Mr. Rob Brittain. Rob's a strategic advisor to CMOs all over the country. We at Think TV have worked with him and see his work. He is really helping build enterprise-wide capability and breaking away from the pack, which is something that all marketers want, and particularly appropriate for him given he is a cyclist. Over the last couple of years, we've worked together. He's an all-round good bloke. He's no stranger to telling us all about the bits of marketing that we would like to know more about, but are too fiddly for us to actually understand. Think econometrics and super complex marketing equations. But what you may not know about Rob is that he is largely stewarding and the custodian of the Australian FE's database. It's a bit of a passion project for the Ad Council and Think TV as well. And I'm looking forward to the sneak peek he's going to give us into the findings from those 300 case studies. Which brings me to the final author, but certainly not the last, my dear friend Karen Nelson Field. I actually don't think there is a human alive who is more passionate about effectiveness and making sure our media ecosystem is fit for purpose. She brings her smarts, a good amount of amazing proprietary technology. If you haven't seen that, you should definitely check it out. That helps us to look under the hood of today's media ecosystem. What's great about Karen is not only does she uncover the broken bits, she will give you a solution for how to put them back together in a way that makes marketers' money work. And if anyone doubts how accomplished she is, there are scads and scads of award. Most recently, MediaTel's Global Media Leader of the Year Award for Technology. Her work's been acknowledged in pretty much any and every publication you can think of. And she is no stranger to doing heavy lifting, which is great given she is in fact a weightlifter. I think the key thing for Karen and the critical question that she asks is how much time does an ad need to be in front of a brand for it to be effective? So with that rather flourished and perhaps overcooked introduction, I will leave you with the three expert authors.
Thanks very much, Kim. Well, with Kim's reminder about time discipline, I'm not going to say very much right now because I want to leave enough time to come back later at the end of this. I just want to say that I think there are three really important reasons why this report I think is going to be sensationally useful right now, and why we really all need to hear from it. The first is that this is incredibly timely. Before COVID, there were signs globally that marketing had begun to kind of turn the corner on, after a 10-year run of declining investment in brand advertising. It had been a pretty grim time. We were beginning to turn the corner. We were beginning to turn upwards, but then COVID hit and it's brought all of that to an abrupt halt. There's been a massive shift away from brand advertising over the last year back to old bad habits of kind of performance marketing, as I would call it. Now, as the world rapidly emerges from recession, and in Australia, obviously, it's happening even more rapidly than many other places in the world, I think it's a really important time to remind marketers of the immense value of brand advertising. And if you like, to renew the positive momentum that we saw before COVID and that has suffered so badly over the last year. So this is fantastic timing, and I hope you're all aware of the very significant importance of this central topic of this. The second reason why I think this is so important is that the analysis that Rob Brittain's going to take you through includes unique and completely new evidence of the value of brand advertising. It all comes, of course, from the Australian EFIs, and it will give you invaluable additional ammunition to build the case for advertising investment, whether you're a marketer or whether you work agency side. This kind of evidence is absolute goldmine stuff. It's really important. So again, take note and use it wisely. And as if all that wasn't enough, we're going to hear from Karen Nelson-Field, who is an absolute world authority on attention measurement. And she's going to remind us that not only do we need to improve the way we measure advertising investment and the way we monitor its effectiveness, but that there are the tools to do it. Really exciting new developments that she's going to talk about as a way of improving the way we monitor our advertising investment. Now, a number of my clients in Europe are already working with her in this area, and believe me, if you're not already learning from Karen, you need to learn from her. So listen in and take good notes. So I'll close my intro. This is the latest Australian Advertising Effectiveness Rules report, following on, as Tony has said from earlier, to Esov and beyond. I think is a hugely valuable playbook for the recovery, and I really hope you find it useful. Enjoy.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so thank you, Peter, and hello to everyone who's joined us today. Now, the situation has changed substantially since June last year, when Peter and I launched our Winning or Losing in a Recession paper. COVID is still a clear and present danger. However, the social distancing and travel restrictions that have been a major brake on growth are continuing to ease. Central bank and government support packages have been well targeted, and it's estimated globally now that households have amassed $5.4 trillion in excess savings since the pandemic began. So consumer and business confidence is high. For many firms, growth is now back on the table. And we all know that advertising plays a critical role in creating and converting demand for brands. So this is a really important moment in time for our industry. But the key question that many marketers have right now is, how do you determine the level of advertising investment that you need in order to capitalize on this growth? And this is basically what we're here to talk about today. Now, before we go any further, we're going to do a quick poll. And what we want to understand is how your advertising investment has changed versus this time last year. So could we publish the poll, please? Put the poll up. And a poll should have appeared in front of you that you can now answer. And so what we're asking is, to what extent has media investment for your brands changed since the same period last year? Now, if you oversee multiple brands, if you could choose the one that's more important to the profitability of either your business or to your client's business. And basically we want to know that, so versus last year when we're in the middle of the recession, has it decreased? Are you still on approximately the same kind of budget, or are you seeing increases? Okay, so we're going to give it probably about another 10 or 15 seconds or so, just to let everybody get their responses in. And then very shortly, we're going to publish the results and see what you all said. Okay, could we close the poll, please, and publish the result? Okay, so we can see from this that actually a quarter of you are actually working on a decreased budget. About 20% haven't changed, and then the remainder, which is what, just a little bit over 50%, it's testing my maths on the run, are seeing some kind of increase, some of you fairly substantial. And the results of this are really important because advertising spend is also back in growth. And as we'll be discussing today, it's the growth of advertising spend at the category level that's actually a really important factor for you in the effectiveness of your brand communications. I'll just close that. Right, before we go any further, there's 4 concepts in this paper, which I'm going to take a couple of minutes to explain. So first of all, share of voice. So share of voice is a measure of the intensity of a brand's advertising investment. So it's defined as the brand's share of total category working media investment. Now, critically, this is an external facing metric. It's based on investment in the category. Previous research has shown that it's brands that have extra share of voice, or what we term ESOV, and that's those where their share of voice is higher than their share of market, that are more likely to grow their market share. And so both share of voice and extra share of voice are competitive metrics. And at the moment, we know that advertising investment is growing strongly. And so if you're not matching this increase, then the intensity with which your brand is competing is declining right at the time when demand from customers is exploding. Secondly, attention. So put simply, for advertising to have an effect, people need to pay attention to it. But it's not quite as simple as that, because there's different types of attention. There's active attention, where it's eyes on. And there's passive, where things are kind of going on in the periphery. And we know that it's from the work that Karen has led, that active attention is much more valuable. The more, simply put, the more attention an ad gets, the higher its impact on short-term sales, but also the bigger its long-term effects. And we know that if no attention is gained, if it's zero attention, then the advertising has zero effect. So I'll be handing over to Karen later in this webinar, and she'll talk about the implications of attention. And then last but not least, mental availability. So mental availability is defined as the propensity for a brand to be noticed and or thought of in buying or usage situations. It's a very clinical way to look at it. But in plain English, it's a measure of how effectively a brand competes in memory. So is the brand likely to beat the others to the surface when an opportunity arises? So that, this is a made up example that you've got in front of you. But if we think about the Aussie icon Vegemite as an example, and the opportunities for the brand could be something to have on toast, something healthy like a healthy snack, or something that gives you a boost to help you be at your best, get through the day. Vegemite is the world's richest known source of vitamin B. And these are termed category entry points. So they're points at which the brand may have a chance to win. And so for one person, Vegemite could just be something to have on toast. They have it for breakfast, occasionally in the morning. Whereas with a second person, Vegemite could be perceived as something to have on toast, but they also might perceive it as a healthy snack. Now, it's likely that Vegemite's salience is similar for both those people. So if we were to ask them to name a spread, amongst other things, they'd both probably be pretty likely to name Vegemite. But Vegemite's mental availability is a fair bit higher with that second person, because they had a greater breadth of perceptions related to the brand. The first person had one reason to buy or consume Vegemite, whereas the second person had multiple reasons. And brands are constantly vying for these perceptions and category entry points. And so, like share of voice and extra share of voice, mental availability is also a competitive metric. And as brands rise, others will fall. And we know that brands with higher mental availability have higher market share. And this is quite simply because they're winning the battle in memory. And however, as I just mentioned, mental availability, it is a competitive metric, and that's why we need to constantly focus on growing it. It's also why the balance between brand building and sales activation activity is so important to brand growth. Brand building builds mental availability, that's its job. So it increases the strength and breadth of perceptions of the brand. Whereas sales activation exploits mental availability, so it leverages those perceptions, but it doesn't really strengthen them. It does very little for that. It's all about exploitation. And so it's the equivalent of sowing your seeds and then harvesting them. And that's where the 60-40 rule that many of you will be aware of comes in. And what Peter and Les are really both have put into the market and are very famous for. And the optimal balance is 60% of investment is allocated to growing mental availability, whereas 40% is allocated to exploiting mental availability. That's the optimal balance. However, many brands fall well short of this. They underinvest in brand building, and as a result of neglecting growing their mental availability. And essentially it sacrifices longer term growth at the expense of delivering the short term. So using the ACA's effectiveness database, we've looked at the impact of growing mental availability on a broad set of business metrics. And there are three groupings of campaigns that we've looked at. There's those that had a negligible or small impact on mental availability, those that had a moderate or large impact, and then those that had a very large impact, which are the ones in the gold bars. And what we observe is a clear relationship between the extent of mental availability growth and the impact on key business metrics. As the effect on mental availability increases, so do the business effects. So we see larger increases in long-term market share growth, in short-term sales response, in customer acquisition, retention, pricing strength, and in brand profit growth. So the ACA's data indicates that the effects of growing mental availability are very broad indeed, and they impact both short and long-term metrics. So our question from here is, how do we build mental availability? So in our view, there are three key driving forces of mental availability. There's budget, media channel selection, and creative strength. Now, note that branding attribution is critical. So after all, people must be able to associate the advertising to the brand for it to have any effect. And we include that within creative strength. Today, I'm going to focus on budget and media selection, and then I'll be handing over to Karen to talk about attention, which we'll see is important in the context of all three. So firstly, another note about ESOV. So it's important to note that ESOV is achievable for a brand of any size. So whether your brand has a market share of 0.1% or 20%. So if your share of voice is higher than your share of market, then you have positive ESOV. If your share of voice is lower than your share of market, then you have negative ESOV. And if your share of voice is the same as your share of market, then you have zero ESOV. So smaller brands require smaller media investment to get positive ESOV, whereas larger brands require larger investment. So to date, analyses on the effects of ESOV have been limited to market share effects. However, we've used the ACA's effectiveness database to look at the effects of ESOV across a broad set of business metrics. And to our knowledge, this is the first time a broader analysis of the impact of ESOV has been done. We've grouped campaigns that have an ESOV of +5 or greater and compared them to the ACA database average. So if a brand had 5% market share, for example, to have an ESOV of +5, it would need to have a share of voice of 10%. So the ACA data shows that ESOV is strongly linked not just to market share growth, which we show on the left-hand side, but also to a raft of long-term success metrics. The implication being that ESOV is important, not just for budget setting, but also for the interpretation of results. So for example, if the ESOV of a previous campaign was higher than for a current campaign, this should be considered when interpreting the results. We've also observed that the effects of positive ESOV are stronger amongst large brands. It's well known that brands become increasingly efficient at leveraging their operating assets as they scale. The ACA data indicates that this is also the case with their mental assets. The effect of ESOV on strengthening pricing, which you'll see there, is also worthy of further mention. So what we've observed is that pricing effects are much more prevalent amongst brands that have positive ESOV. And this is really important for us because we typically talk about advertising in the context of driving growth. What this data shows is the powerful role that advertising can play in driving both growth, but also in driving margin expansion. Now, we wanted to understand the effects of ESOV more deeply. So what we did is we grouped campaigns based on their media spend and then split them by their level of business effect. So we have essentially lower effect campaigns, which have either 0 or 1 very large business effect. And then we have higher effect campaigns, which had 2 or more very large business effects. And when we took those and we overlaid average ESOV and the effect on mental availability, a clear pattern emerged, and that is the graph on the right-hand side. So the data indicates that it's ESOV, not absolute media spend, that's more important to campaign effectiveness. If you draw your attention again to the chart on the left, we can see that small budget campaigns can impact mental availability and key business metrics to a similar extent as large budget campaigns when their ESOV is positive. So whilst the spread in ESOV is wider amongst small campaigns, so is the variation in mental availability gains. And we see that same pattern hold for both medium and large size campaigns. Now, the spreads in ESOV reduce in those medium and large campaigns, but so do the variations in mental availability. And so that same link is still there. So in other words, brands of any size can drive growth in mental availability and deliver significant business effects, but ESOV is key. However, what we'll see now is it can be amplified or undermined by media choices. So taking those same sets, and if we overlay further detail of the media investment, we can see that the breadth of channel usage increases as budget goes up. And that's not surprising because we'd expect to see that. When brands have bigger budgets, they can afford to use more channels. However, the average number of channels used by both the higher and the lower effect campaigns was very similar at each budget level. But the difference was in the percentage of allocation of investment into video channels, and there's much more variation there, which is on the far right-hand side. So for small and medium budgets, the primary driver was the allocation to video, not the number of channels. Whereas the picture for large budgets is more complex. So we still observe that link between ESOV and mental availability. However, it appears that overinvestment in video channels may be partly to blame for less effective campaigns. And it could be at 68% of budget. Perhaps these campaigns have just exceeded the optimal allocation towards video. So what we see is that up to an optimum point, the higher the allocation to video, the stronger the effects. But it doesn't look like that allocation to video really starts to become a concern until campaigns start to get really quite large, so in the 5 million plus sort of region. So we've seen that share of voice, it's a powerful and important methodology, but there are growing threats that we need to address. The share of voice methodology was created before the age of digital media. And we all know now that digital accounts for a really significant proportion of overall spend. So firstly, share of voice is getting more and more difficult to measure. Now, much of this is due to walled gardens. So meaning that some of digital spend is impossible to track. And the advertisers, they'll see that clearly in their own data. They know what their digital spend is, but when the numbers are reported back to them, they can really vary significantly. And then when you couple that with the buying of many digital media formats on an audience impression basis instead of placements, accurately measuring digital spend is very, very difficult. Secondly, the media marketplace has become increasingly dysfunctional. So share of voice works on the assumption that market forces account for the relative value of different media and daypart exposures. However, there's a performance inequity between media platforms that market forces aren't accounting for. And this is resulting in the relationship that Esov relies on. It's a relationship between dollars per impression and effectiveness per impression. But that relationship is being increasingly broken. And this is something that Karen is going to talk about very shortly, about the implications of that and her work in this area. Thirdly, creative strength makes a huge difference. So when all else is equal, the biggest differentiator between a mediocre campaign and a great campaign is the strength of the creative. System 1 has recently evolved our understanding of this further by showing that there was an increase in the correlation between ESOV and market share when creative strength is considered. Share of voice does not take into account the quality of what goes down the pipes. And finally, share of search. So share of search is useful in certain categories, but what we really need to remember is share of search is an outcome of other marketing activity that went before it. It's not a silver bullet. So you can liken share of search to a thermometer, so it can measure the temperature. But if you think about something like share of voice, that's like a thermostat. You can turn the heat up or down using it. So where we're at now is the founding principle of share of voice. It remains critical in planning advertising budgets, but it needs to evolve to correct for these threats. So now I'm going to hand over to Karen and for her to talk about her world-leading research into attention, which we believe provides an exciting way forwards. So Karen, over to you.
I come in on the end of this amazing report. I just was asked to have a read through, have a look at particularly the threats that Rob was talking about and sort of see if I have any sort of point of view around any of them, and I certainly do. So I just wrote this actually just a second ago, but he talks about advertising playing a critical role in strength, in brand strength, but it can't if it can't be seen. And creative strength, he says, makes a difference, but it can't if it can't be seen. So if you could just flick to the next slide. In the report, he talks about them as elephants in the room. He changed it to threats. But of all the threats that he talked about today, I literally quite seriously think that threat B or elephant B is literally solely responsible for eroding the value of the true value of Esov for marketers. So as Rob sort of alluded to, the data we use for Esov is not even close to being commensurate with the vast performance differences between platforms, yet these metrics are core to the accuracy of the output. So, Rob was talking about threat B and calls out the dysfunction of the media ecosystem. In fact, he says in the report about how the real value of media is unknown because no one really knows how much attention is being paid. And this has the potential to leave large gaps in the relationship between dollars per impression and effectiveness per impression. So I'm here to say that actually that's a little bit of an understatement. And I have to say that, no one knows this better than us. I mean, we collect human attention against real-time viewing across many video channels, including TV as well. And we can see that even if an ad is viewable by MRC standards, less than 50% of the time of an ad in view, any active attention is paid at all. And trust me, there's a lot of deviation around that mean. So you would be quite horrified if you knew the numbers on some digital platforms. So I guess my point is, this is why inward-facing proxies like viewability are flawed. They tell us little about what a human is doing. We call it the viewability to attention gap, and that gap is massive. So next slide. So any effectiveness measure like share of voice that relies on clean inputs, traditional impression data, supposedly accurate measure of what a human's been exposed to will fail. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. In fact, you might be getting less share of voice than you think. So we often sort of say, think of it this way. If you're overspending on low attention platforms and underspending on high attention platforms, while your competitors are doing the opposite, the principles of share of voice fail, because even on the surface, if it looks like you're spending the same media weight, it's what lies beneath that will let you down, and your brand will quite possibly decline. Actually, we more recently this week actually just released some findings at Cannes, some early findings on Cannes between the link of attention and mental availability. And what we found across multiple brands is that when active attention is paid, mental availability uplift is notably positive, and the inverse is true. When no attention is paid, mental availability uplift is notably negative, or at least no sizable change. We also found that the uplift is achieved in line with overall platform performance. And what this means is, in other words, platforms that inherently deliver higher levels of tension drive more mental availability uplift. So I guess my point is to say, next slide, that if you're, you can't change this. The reality is, the level of human attention paid is a functional reality of each platform, and there's systematic sameness across multiple countries, and we can see this in the data we collect. So, you cannot just expect to put a longer ad on a low attention platform and expect it to work. It doesn't work that way. And even better creative on low attention formats won't work either. But what I will tell you is, and what we've been doing more recently, that you can layer attention data over your share of voice modeling to adjust for this performance difference. So we've been using the data we have. In fact, we've got a massive global project across 4 countries as we speak, where essentially what we're doing is optimizing campaign impressions on actual attention data, which essentially provides a new estimate of media weight. And then that's fed back into share of voice analysis. And this adjusted view will actually show you how many seconds or days of attention you think you get on your media plan versus what you could actually get. And I guess my point is that, from a share of voice perspective, if you, as I said, if you're only getting 6 million seconds, but your competitor's getting 12 million seconds, for example, on the same media budget, then your share of voice will fail. So just looking at it from the last slide, please. The inequity in platform performance, it doesn't just impact the obvious, it impacts, there's a whole lot of things that are impacted. So anything that has any reach attached to it in terms of media planning or media buying or share of voice analysis is affected by this issue. And sadly, there's no real transparency around this truth. And this is the problem we're solving for, sort of trying to understand how we can add human data to essentially planning systems to adjust for these realities. So in layman's terms, what attention adjustment does is it gives you real opportunity to see for your share of voice versus hoped opportunity to see, which is what we've been trading on for many years. So we are sort of recoining, thanks to these guys as well, the name of it. So when you do this, you're essentially changing your share of voice analysis to a share of attention analysis. So you can compare the number of attention seconds your brand achieves to the competitor set. So for us, this is actually quite a simple solution. And I'm not here to be the bearer of the bad news, but given the importance of Esov to brand growth, I think it's really a valuable, an important lesson to talk about. Thanks, Rob.
So look, fantastic presentations full of truly amazing stuff. I just wanted, while you get your heads together to think about the Q&A session, I just wanted to take you through what I thought were the most important takeouts of all of this. And there's a lot more in the full report as well than we've been able to cover just here. So look, Rob has already mentioned this, that this is genuinely a first. He's shown that ESOV is linked not just to mental availability, but a raft of other really, really important business effects and business outcomes, not least of which, of course, is pricing power. So that brings incredible multiplier benefits to the value of investment in brand share of voice. We don't just drive volume, we also drive margin, and the two together obviously have a vitally important impact on profitability. And what we do know, of course, is that mental availability is not built appreciably through performance marketing. It is a unique benefit of brand marketing. So this is, as I said earlier, a hugely timely wake-up call to marketers after a year of hunkering down, if you like, to get back to investing in their brands. And of course, in so doing, Rob has reinforced the whole importance of maintaining share of voice, albeit all of the caveats about how we measure that in this walled garden world that we're forced to live in at the moment. But the importance of maintaining positive ESOV remains a useful and really important guideline at the moment. So what more evidence do we need of the importance of brand advertising? He's also touched on this, but the quality of the creative execution is also vitally important, because what leads to mental availability, we know, is a combination of well-guided investment plus attention-grabbing advertising. And if you really want to be in the A team of effective marketers, you need to be doing both. Adequate investment, well-guided media choices, and top-flight creative. And if you're not doing all three, then you expose yourself to the risk that one of your competitors will outgun you. So that was Rob's, I think, huge contribution to the science of effectiveness. Karen has built on this wonderfully with some very forward-facing views about where we need to go. She's shown us that SOV levels alone are becoming an unreliable metric. She used the word understatement, and I think that's very true, because an awful lot of money out there is chasing kind of completely unknown levels of attention. Money put into particularly digital platforms on the basis of impressions gained rather than the genuine attention getting value of those impressions. So the market, particularly for video advertising, is very badly broken, and we have to find a fix for this if we want to wisely and accurately invest our money in the best possible way. And Karen hasn't gone into this in detail in this presentation, but the attention levels of different video platforms shown in her work are enormously different. I mean, truly enormously different. So it is totally insane to regard the same kind of impression on one video platform as being of equal value to a video impression on another platform. It just makes no sense. And yet, to a large degree, that is the way the market is kind of valuing it at the moment. So it's really, really important going forward that we account for the widely differing abilities of video communication channels to bring brand advertising to the attention of consumers, and it is properly factored into media plans. And as I said a moment ago, that is simply not the case now. But then finally, Karen has tantalizingly offered us, I think, a really, really exciting vision of the future of advertising investment measurement in the shape of share of attention. Now, I think this is just totally electrifying. I'm looking forward hugely to a future where we regularly see share of attention measurements of our campaigns. And of course, the great thing about that is that it doesn't just take account of the wisdom with which we have guided our media choices, but also it takes account of the quality of the creative work that's all factored in there. And of course, this will give us unique abilities really to make well-informed decisions. So look, I found this a terrific piece of work from Rob and Karen. I hope it's really valuable to you. And I think I'm going to hand over to Kim for Q&A now. Thank you for listening.
I think we're all coming back on now, Peter.
We're back. Oh, and we've got things on the screen. Thanks, Peter. And actually, thanks also to Rob and Karen. We've got about 600 people on this call, which is fantastic in and of itself. Many of them marketers or brand owners. Peter and perhaps the rest of the team, armed with the sweet taste of information we've had this evening, I wake up tomorrow morning, I'm a brand owner. What kind of questions should I ask my team, myself, my agency, all three, around what I can do to increase my performance across comparative platforms? What should I do? What questions should I ask straight away while I'm churning through the report to make sure that I'm getting the best value for money when we think about mental availability and attention.
Do you
I
want
think
me
that's
to?
one for you to Karen.
I was going to
Karen,
say, do you want me to start? Look, I mean, this is an easy one for me. I mean, Peter, you were right. The vast differences across platforms, but not just across platform, but also within platforms. So we do obviously different formats across a lot of the video formats, and we're also doing World Wide Web now as well. And it really does shock me. And I think when you actually do understand the vast difference, an advertiser should be asking their teams, do they know these differences, I think, Kim. So for first, I mean, there's a lot of smart marketers out there that are doing share of voice analysis, and that's fantastic. But I think the next critical piece is to say, what is lying beneath that? And do we know, and how can we find out?
Okay, great.
I'm going to start with a question. It's a fairly general question. We've got almost 50 in the Q&A box, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. But the first one that came up to me is, do you think many marketers are setting their budgets on a share of voice basis at the moment? And do you think many marketers are competing on a mental availability basis at the moment? That's a general one for all of you, I suppose.
Okay, well, why didn't I chip in on this one? I mean, I think certainly the kind of organisations I work with, share of voice planning is clearly quite well established and quite widely on their radar. Of course, it does imply that you have to make some informed guesses about competitive spend. So I think it's always moderated, and I think the other key factor is that it's a very dynamic. I mean, people don't tend to lay down budgets too firmly in advance. It tends to be quite dynamic, and people are quite agile about adapting to things, which I think is the right way to play it. So yes, I do think it's very very much ingrained increasingly in budget planning. I think the whole share of attention end of thing is in its infancy. As I said earlier, a few of my European clients are working with Karen and are absolutely gobsmacked, I think, by her findings. Very, very useful to realize that €1 spent in different video platforms can bring enormously different value to them. So I think that end of things is only in its infancy. I absolutely predict it will take over the world very, very quickly. I think it's going to be the way we all start thinking, because it brings so many benefits. So but I think what we want to manage here is a careful transition from the old way of thinking about share of voice on its own to attention, moderated share of voice, and to ultimately to share of attention. I think we need a good, careful handover from old to new. But that's the way it has to go in my book, just to make sense of the complexities of the world we live in.
Can I add to that? May I add to that?
Yeah.
So what I love about that is, we're working with a big global who is doing their budgeting across multiple countries, but they are moving categories, right? So the reality is, what we're trying to do is not get people to spend more money, but spend it more wisely. So I think what people could almost understand is that so the objectives that this particular organization is trying to achieve, they have to move the needle a lot, right? Because it's a totally different category that they're moving into. And so for them, they don't have, 50% more of lots and lots of millions of dollars. So what we're trying to do is trying to work out, with the money that they have, how can we readjust the attention that they are already getting compared to what they could achieve if they spent the same money. So often I'll get people sort of say, oh yeah, but we don't want to spend more, but I'm telling you that there's value or effectiveness to be squeezed out if you actually know what an impression's worth on platform A versus platform B.
Yeah, I think if it's okay, I'll chip in as well. I think to build on Peter and Karen's points, the bigger, more sophisticated advertisers, I think they're at that edge where they're thinking deeply about share of voice and much more around the types of platforms they're using. We know there's an awful lot of campaigns with very small spend where, you know, the sophistication is a lot lower. And I think these are the ones that often they can benefit a lot just from principles. You know, so first of all, just thinking about the competitive environment when you're planning about marketing budgeting is really important, rather than just carrying over the same number you had last year, because that's what you do. So I think that's part of it. And then, you know, there's, from the work that Karen's done, and, you know, if you read her published work, you know, there are clear principles that you can follow. You know, there is, at the top end of town, there is things around really optimizing, but there are very clear patterns that you can follow to make sure that the share of voice that you're buying, that you are making sure that you're getting more bang for your buck, essentially, as far as attention is concerned. So I think it depends on the spectrum in terms of the maturity of the team, the maturity of the business, the maturity of marketing within it. But even just going through the discipline of starting to think about these kind of things is a really healthy thing for marketing to do if it's not already doing it.
Thanks, Rob. There's a couple of questions that are the same that have popped up in the feed, so I'll ask the next one, which is, can you provide guidance on what low attention versus what high attention platforms are? What's the difference? What are they? There's at least 3 or 4 questions in the thread on that one.
Oh, Karen,
I told you,
it's the secret
Karen,
sauce.
you were gonna get that question.
Oh my
I'm
God.
sorry,
I'd be a
Karen.
politician.
It's been asked about 5 times, so I felt I had to.
You should ask the Colonel if he'll share his recipe as well. I think.
Look, I think if you use your common sense, you know the answer, just saying, audience. But I'm not here to call out bad performance versus good performance. What I will say is that each platform does play a role. But I think if you use your common sense, you know, if there's a platform, and this includes general web, that fosters distraction through, you know, other things other than the ad, which is potentially right down in the corner, then those are going to sort of generate lower attention versus platforms that make the ad front and center. I mean, there's a fine sort of balance between user experience and ad delivery. I understand all of that. But yeah, I'm sorry, I can't do a politician thing, and a politician thing would do what I'm doing, which is not tell you. So yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, well, very deftly handled, I think.
Just a word of warning on this. I mean, I think the real danger here is that you confuse and conflate the whole kind of performance marketing statistics, because there's plenty out there that will show you that, you know, some online platforms are very, very powerful performance marketing platforms. That does not mean, be quite clear, that they are good brand building platforms. The requirements are totally different. And in my experience, the better the performance marketing performance of a platform, often the worse it is as a brand builder, because of the way they're working. So you just have to be really careful about that. And, you know, I think read more of Karen's work, you know, where she is a little more open about this particular issue, and you will soon learn, I think, which of the particular platforms one needs to be aware of if you're thinking about brand building. I'm not for the moment saying, you know, that that necessarily applies to all aspects of communications, but here we're primarily talking about driving growth in the recovery, about looking forward to you know, a positive era of growth, and we're fighting our corner in that, and that is going to require adequate brand investment. So just don't be led by the performance marketing statistics, and be quite clear about the difference between the two of them.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
very,
adding
very
to that, Peter, I mean, we have done plenty of work around the amount of active attention seconds and the slope of the decay. So memory retention, right? So we know across 4 years, replicated studies, many countries, that the more active attention seconds, the longer an ad will stay in memory, or the decay is slower, basically. So, and, you know, to your point, that's not to say that short-term goals are not important, but we are talking about long-term goals here. So look for platforms that give you more seconds is my outtake.
Okay, here's one from Chris Stevenson. Perhaps a bit of a theoretical thought experiment, but if all advertisers in a category follow the golden rules and invest to achieve ESOV, how do you avoid runaway media spend and ESOV inflation in that category? Seems like a good problem to me.
Yes, well, of course, this is a question that I've often had over the years, usually people from the finance department for understandable reasons. I mean, it's a problem that you rarely get. I mean, obviously, if it's a very high margin sector or category, then perhaps there is that risk. In practice, you know, we don't see it. It just doesn't tend to happen. Usually, it starts very rapidly to sort the stronger brands, stronger businesses out from the weaker ones, and things settle down. But yeah, I can see it as more of a theoretical risk than an actual risk.
Thanks, Peter. There's actually a really lovely question from Yvonne Williams, which I think is probably for Rob Brittain. In terms of the findings in the study, does it actually hold true for all the categories that the FEs, covers? Is it fair to say that?
I think it is. Unfortunately, we're not able to get down to the kind of micro level on that yet, but my sense from the data, and maybe Peter can talk about from the IPA database perspective, is that what we see, they're very broad principles. They work because they work on memory, and memory doesn't change regardless of whether you're selling money at a bank or whether you're selling chocolate. So yeah, for me, I believe that yes, that they do hold. But Peter, the IPA database goes back a very long time. Is your feeling based on that what we see does hold across different sectors and different brand types?
Yeah, absolutely. In effectiveness in context, which was the last report that Les and I wrote together, we specifically looked at this to the maximum extent that we could, and we found there are no obvious exceptions. I mean, there are some subtleties of balance, nuances, different levels of response that you get, different scale of benefits you get from one sector or category to the next, but the principles hold, the benefits hold, and the advice holds. It is just subtle variations to do with the 60-40 balance, for instance, or the amount of share of market growth you would drive per point of the Esov. That does vary from one category to another, but the principles still hold. So the advice is good, and I'm pretty damn confident, for the reasons Rob has mentioned, that there won't be any complete exceptions to this.
Okay, now we originally said that there was that we were going to cut off at 6 o'clock, and we're almost there at the moment. But as we've got so many people on the line, we will keep going for a little while as long as the panelists are available. I know Karen is not available for too much longer, so I might address a couple of quick questions that was specifically targeted to you, Karen.
Sure.
One is, there's a few around this sort of measuring of share of attention and that sort of stuff. But Karen, what's your recommendation for accurately measuring the share of attention of competitors when the industry standard for competitive reporting unfortunately falls down on digital measurement? And another one that's a little bit the same, but can you talk more about active versus passive attention?
Sure. I mean, the first one, I'm fortunate enough to work with some of the biggest advertisers who have access to competitor spends as well. So, that's probably one actually for Rob to talk through in terms of being able to get access to competitor data. But basically what we're doing with the data that we have with the clients we work with is looking at attention for, by transitioning their media mix or their share of voice. We also do that for their competitors within their category. So, I'm guessing that's pretty hard, and it's not perfectly accurate. I get all of that, but it's relative. So the error in one is the same as the error in another. So I think that's the best we can do. I don't think that the nature of auditing, Rob, am I wrong, is perfect. Do you want to add to that before I move on to the next one?
No, you're all good. We'll make the most of your time.
I'm sorry. And the second one is, this is not about me. This is about these two men. So we haven't discussed the depth of our technology, but in essence, how our tech works is that we do a number of things. We can drop into any country, and essentially when you go on, with your permission, we're GDPR compliant, we can actually collect facial footage from multiple different devices through the camera. And because we also latch on, we put code behind the sponsored ad, we actually know where the ad is on screen. So those coordinates come back to our machine learning models, and they punch out active attention, which is in its 5 frames per second. So, I talk quite broadly, but it's actually quite a granular measure. So at 5 frames per second, I can tell if you're looking directly at the ad, which is literally eyes on ad attention. Passive attention is when you're looking at the device, but you are not looking directly at the ad. And Kim would know this more than anyone. We have a solution for television as well. So active is looking directly at the ad. Passive is looking nearby the ad, but not directly at the ad. And there is a role to play for that, but it just doesn't have the same strength to add impact. And of course, non-attention is when the footage or the person's actually switched away from the device or the ad at all. So that's really important. So we took that originally from literature that shows there are different levels of attention, and that passive attention can play a role. And that's where distinctive assets sort of come into play. But active by far has the strongest relationship with business outcomes, including mental availability.
Thanks, Karen. Tony, I know Karen's not pressed for time, she's given us hours, but for this evening, she's got a hard stop. Is there anything else you want to explore with Karen before she goes?
I don't, maybe this one, it'd be interesting to get Karen's perspective on this. Creative quality has come up a few times. Do you have a way of quantifying this like we do media, like we do spend and media choice?
So creative is subjective, right? So, so there's a few characteristics that we can see that are consistent with good creative. And I wrote a book on it. It was my first book actually that I ever wrote, which looks at the concept of emotions in advertising. So understanding that creative is high or low arousal is really valuable, and it's a trigger point. So we call it, sort of bottom-up triggers, which is unintended. So high emotive advertising does drive attention. We can also see that other sort of unexpectedness triggers do as well. So sound loud or sound off completely and things like that. But what I will tell you, which is probably not the most loved comments that I make, but we can see quite, because I always get the question, which is it creative or media? And what we can see across most of the data that we collect is that, even amazing creative performs poorly on generally low attention platforms. So it's not like you can have a Cannes Lion winner and it gets, 6 or 7 seconds, because trust me, if you get 6 or 7 seconds, you're doing well. On one platform, it just goes down in terms of how many seconds it actually achieves relative to the performance of that platform. So my point is, we know that creative might play a role, and I actually saw this in my original book, that it can sort of change the index of share view, but view to share. But it certainly is impacted negatively if a beautiful Cannes Lion winner is put on a poor performing platform. So I'm all about media weight or media performance first, creative second. Combined, they're perfectly functional, but you can have a Cannes Lion winner that doesn't get seen and it's worth nothing.
And there's a similar, I don't know if you can generalize after this, because there's another question around, which is probably not definitive in a general sense, but are there any learnings to the length of an ad? For example, a 5-6 second ads equivalent to 1 30-second ad from an effectiveness perspective?
So what I will tell you is that longer ads don't bestow more attention. So there's no relationship between longer ad length and more attention. And that's the functionality of platform performance. But so in terms of output, in terms of like impact, I would say it's nothing to do with the ad length and all to do with how many attention seconds you get. So if you could get 10 seconds on a 15-second ad, it's going to be 10 seconds of attention, and that's what actually bestows the impact, not because it's 15 or because it's 30.
Okay. Kim, do you have any more questions of Karen before?
Plenty,
got-
but none she's going to answer. So.
Oh, she's going to ask me how TV
No,
fares.
I promise I'm not. I promise I'm not. I promise. I
You know I like TV.
I know, me too. But no, I'm not going to ask that. No.
All right, Karen, we'll let you
Thanks,
go at any
guys. That was so much
time.
fun. I'll
Thank
dip out
you,
in a minute. Thank you.
And
Thank you, Karen.
I have got one question that I can address to Robert and Peter, because it's a good one, and I think they've got a bit of an answer here. Are there any observations on the average time lag between investing in ESRV and seeing significant market share and growth impacts? So I think you've both got some information out of the database that might be able to help with that.
Certainly do. I mean, I don't know, do you want to go first, Robert? I'm happy to take that.
No, you go. I'll add afterwards.
So, okay, so the basic correlation, the founding work done on the relationship between ESOV and market share growth was done by John Philip Jones back in the early 90s. All of that, and indeed the work I've done with Les and the work we're looking at here is essentially based on a 12-month relationship. So the ESOV that you achieve in year one is reflected in the market share growth you achieve over in between that year and the following year. So that's the way the model works. It doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that you have to wait a whole year for that growth to come. It just means that the actual relationship is strongest when you compare one year with the next. That's the way it works. So we know that good brand investment will drive share growth, almost immediately. I mean, it does have short-term effects. It's just that these accumulate over time. So usually the payback isn't achieved until perhaps 6 to 12 months later. So that's why I think it's important to take a longer-term view when you're measuring the benefits of brand investment, because the effects build, and it's only when they've had a chance to build that you're starting to get some of the often spectacular paybacks that you get when you invest properly behind good creative work. So my usual advice is never really attempt to evaluate brand advertising in periods of less than 6 months. And frankly, I've tried this. Even 6 months in, it's very difficult often to distinguish it from the noise that goes on in any market at any time. And I've recently been involved in trying to evaluate a really powerful piece of advertising with big budgets behind it. And 6 months in, the noise was very difficult to discern and prove the brand effect. But give it a bit longer, wait 12 months, and it starts to become very clear. And obviously, we know that the benefits, particularly of TV advertising, which is very powerful. And Karen's now gone, so we can speak openly about the strengths of TV advertising, which are, of course, very, very great. But we know that the benefits of TV advertising play out over at least 2 years. It's somewhere between 2 and 3 years, really, before it starts to tail off completely. So we're going to get that investment back from share of voice in TV advertising over quite a long period of time. So the longer you can leave it to start to pull together that benefit, the better the chance you have of taking it properly into account. So just, you can't rush it. You can't rush it. And I know that's not great to say. You need to look for early signs of success, because if there aren't any early signs of success, there probably won't be long-term signs of success. But you can't rush the kind of ROI evaluation. You've just got to wait for it to have achieved what it will achieve over time. So that's a bit of a long answer.
Yeah, I think so. So to have my 2 pennies there, I think part of it is to do with the how frequently the category is purchased, in terms of how quickly you start to see effects. So, if it's something you purchase annually, then it is going to take a longer time before you start to see it, versus something that's maybe purchased 4 or 5 times a year. So there's that dynamic. I think the other part of it, to build on what Peter was saying, that the first paper we collaborated on, we looked at the effect of the longer term, and what we saw was when you do measure the effect of campaigns over a larger time, then you do see greater effects. And so I think that the problem for marketers in a business is how do you make sure that you or your colleagues or the board retain patience in what you're doing. And that's when I think you need to adopt a view of looking at leading indicators. So that's where advertising performance metrics, they're not effect of advertising, they are whether we believe that they give us forward indicators as to whether we believe that it's going to be highly effective later on, because what you're looking to do is shift memory. And so look at the metrics that you have, the way that you evaluate performance, both of the copy when it's in market, but then how you're looking at memory, which is things like brand tracking later on, and use those things, but provide confidence when you're going through. If you believe you have something strong from early indications, then it's the kind of thing that you should stick with. But yeah, I think the category you operate in is going to have a pretty significant effect. You know, as a sample of one, having worked with a client that has an annual purchase, I think it was probably in the 6 to 12 months kind of time frame before they started to see the effect of, you know, that focusing on an ESOV and a very solid brand investment. So yeah, it did take a while to flow through, but then 3 or 4 years later, the compound effects of them are massive. Like, it is astonishing how powerful their platform is now, their brand platform. And it's because they have the fortitude to stick with it.
Rob, I've got one, which is, I think, probably something that lots of brands think about. If you're a brand that has a reliance on digital spend, and there is a fundamental question around share of voice reporting in those digital channels, how would a brand that was digitally reliant on its media platforms apply ESOV principles?
I think this is where, you know, if you think about it from what Karen's been saying around attention and the sorts of thing, you'd probably be able to write down a list of platforms from high attention to low attention. And so literally, if I didn't have the data and I was stuck literally just with digital, I would think about what Karen said about how they foster attentional distraction. And I would look to direct my investment towards those ones that I believe foster less distraction.
Okay, thank you.
I've got one.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that, again, what a lot of Karen's work has shown, and other evidence I've seen as well, is that if you're talking about brand building, there is a kind of spectrum. You've got TV, which is a fantastic brand building media at one end, and you've got social at the other end, which tends to be not very good at brand building. And you've got kind of YouTube somewhere in the middle. And it's all down to the way people are viewing it. So even if you can't know the numbers, you need to just think about the kind of viewing context that your advertising is going to be enjoying. For instance, on news brands platforms, you know, where people are enjoying, you know, they're reading the news, or they're interested, it's more of a lean back. Same with YouTube, it's an entertainment medium like TV is, so it's more of a lean back. Whereas if you're on social, it's, you know, you're doing other stuff, you know, you're connecting with your social network, your whole interaction with that medium is very different, and it's much less amenable to brand building. So even if you can't actually measure all this stuff, just think about the environments you're in and be very wary of where kind of programmatic platforms are putting you. You need to try and steer it to the right kind of environment. Context is really, really important to the effectiveness of advertising. There's no doubt about it. And getting in the wrong context will certainly undermine the effect. So there's a lot you can do without hard numbers, just using intuition, gut feel, and a knowledge of the principles of how advertising works to steer your ads into the right environment. Of course, all different if you're talking about performance marketing. And I'm always interested to know why brands feel that they're digitally I don't know what the expression was, digitally kind of focused. Do you have to be? I mean, it's always been the case that the smartest media plans have a combination of digital and traditional media, that you mix these up and you do it carefully. So, I mean, the first question I'd be asking myself is, why am I on 100% digital media mix in the first place? But, you know, if there are really good reasons why that is the case, then just be careful.
Which leads me to a question from John Bradshaw, which is getting down to almost the 60-40 balance that you were talking about. Any advice on dealing with the messy fact that brand advertising does have a short-term impact, but less than performance, and performance ads do have a mental availability impact, albeit much less? The principle is 100% accepted, but it can be hard to land with clients when the truth is a little messy. So have you got any advice as to how you sort of continue with this combination of building a brand and providing activation?
Well, you just have to keep bringing them back to the evidence, and the evidence is you know, quite strong in the work that Les and I have done, and increasingly in the work that Rob and I have done, that the performance marketing route just doesn't drive these kind of year-on-year effects. I mean, it's important that you do it because you get greater efficiency out of the brand building that you're doing. But I mean, if there's one key chart that Les and I have produced over the years, it shows the relationship. We divide the sample of cases into 4 groups: those that didn't do much to build the brand and those that didn't do much to drive short-term activation, and their business effectiveness is pretty dire. We have ones that that were very focused on short-term performance marketing but didn't do much to build the brand. They're better, quite a bit better, but they're not great. Those that built the brand but didn't do much to drive performance marketing, which are better still, but they're still not great. And it's the campaigns that did these two in balance, you know, and this is the data one needs to collect, and the case studies you need to revere and bring your clients back to. It's the ones that built the brand and in balance activated off the back of it that are always the case studies that are you know, at the top of the pile. I mean, you just need to keep bringing them back to that evidence that it's not good enough to choose one or the other. You have to do both, and you have to do both in balance. And keep them focused on the long term, because otherwise you're just chasing your tail. If you're always after short-term effects, it's a recipe ultimately for destruction of the brand. But in the short term, you just, you know, all you're doing is chasing your tail.
Yeah, I think to add on there, I mean, there's part of it was in the question, right, about what is the major effect of what something does, and being very clear on that. But I mean, for me, because I work with clients to try and take principles into reality in their business, and really it's when you see it in your own data that you believe it even more. And for me, I think a lot of it is about experimentation, really. So being very clear about what we believe the roles are, even though there is a bit of grey in between, but be clear about what the roles and what the purpose of investments in different areas are. Use constructs that help to actually show this a bit better. So things like the sales funnel. So you're clear about, you know, what is it that we're doing to create future demand? What kind of metrics are we looking at for that? What are the things that are we doing to convert current demand in markets? And what are the sort of metrics we're looking at for that? And tinker around, turn things on and off. It's certainly for businesses that overinvest in performance media, it's a challenge I always give out, but one that virtually everyone is always too afraid to take up, is turn it off for a little bit. And if you can't turn it off, just do it in a state that doesn't really matter on a brand that's really small. So I'm up in Queensland at the moment. In a previous life, when I worked on the corporate side, we used to experiment in Queensland. We used to turn it on and off all the time. And at the end of the day, you start to see what drops out at the bottom. And so things like this, there's no better way to do it. That's why they test vaccine in that way. Some people get placebos, some people get the real thing, and they see how many people get sick or how many people are cured. And often that is the route you have to go through. But I don't think there's a silver bullet, because some people aren't swayed by evidence. And then it's kind of almost like a religious conversation. You need evidence that's going to show it. And that's where partnership and having a clear program around, we're going to test these principles, we're going to show them in our data, and we're going to build knowledge around being clear about which things do which, or predominantly do which, and then go from there. But it's very hard to walk into a room and come out and everyone's gone, yep, 60-40, that's what we're going to do. They'll nod, they'll intellectually, they'll get it. But shifting behavior is the difficult thing, and that's the longer journey.
And remember the fascinating Airbnb experience, which I'm sure
Yes.
everyone listening is aware of. You know, these guys continue to invest in the brand during the lockdown, which is absolutely the right thing to do, in my opinion. Some people might have said that's crazy, nobody can travel, but you know, that the way brand marketing works is it's for the long term. And what they found when the lockdown in the US ended was that without a single dollar being spent on performance marketing, their website traffic was up to 95%, I think, of what it had been before, without a single dollar of performance marketing. So that's the great strength. I mean, it's obviously a very powerful brand with a good dominant position. We wouldn't all brands wouldn't expect to see that kind of response, but it just does indicate that the brand drives response, it drives business, and that performance marketing is not a substitute for that kind of enduring power.
Kim, it's 6:20. Have you got one last question you'd like to address, or are you done? There's so many in the Q&A box, it's hard to keep track of them all.
There are. I think one of the questions that I was really interested in is, and it's a kind of a tricky one from an anonymous attendee, so I don't know where it's come from, is can you have, so loaded, can you have a
Probably one of Karen's people.
maybe. Can you, right, I don't think so, actually looking at the question. Can you have a high attention performance ad? So ads that drive mental availability, but also direct response.
Oh, well, this is, of course, a very interesting question. And of course, a lot of clients would like to do this. I honestly think that this is a kind of false trail. It really is. I mean, what we generally find is that the requirements of a great brand building ad are precisely the opposite of the requirements of a great performance marketing ad. And Karen has already talked about a requirement for longer spans of attention. If you're going to drive brand, if you're going to build a brand, you need more than 1, 2, 3 seconds of attention. She's argued that you don't necessarily need 30 seconds. You can do it in less, and that's very interesting, useful finding. But you need longer attention for brand building than you do for performance. But also the whole targeting issue is totally different. If I'm brand building, we know from the work of Ehrenberg Bass that we need to be reaching out very broadly to everyone in the category, because we're trying to bring them in towards our brand so that when they do buy in the future, they buy our brand, and particularly if it's an infrequent purchase, that could be months away. Whereas performance marketing is about the now. If I serve that message to you and you're not on the point of buying, I'm completely wasting the dollars because you ain't going to remember it. So this idea of saying, well, can we do a hybrid that kind of builds the brand and kind of, I think you end up achieving neither very efficiently. You're not doing the performance job very strongly because, it's over length, it's expensively targeted, blah, 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 and you're not doing the brand building because, because you haven't gone as broad as you can. The requirements are different. So, I get it that in theory it might be possible to do it, but in practice, I think you're just going to end up with some pretty lousy figures.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the only thing I'd say is I think creativity and performance marketing generally, they're not two things that have gone together. I think that performance marketing can be improved through creativity, but can performance marketing build brands? Fundamentally, just no. I just don't think it can, because to Peter's point, it's not working against enough people. It's literally those who are right down at the bottom of the funnel. You're missing the 98% of the market who might buy your brand in the future with it. So it's never going to do much. But creativity and performance marketing could do some wonderful things for performance marketing. It could make it, more effective. But it's not going to do the brand job. It's just going to convert better.
So a hard no from you two.
Yes, very long-winded one.
Okay.
Sorry, I wouldn't do it if it was my money. I wouldn't do it if it was my money.
Sorry,
All right.
It's a big no.
All right, look, before I ask Kim to sort of sum up and thank our panelists, including Karen, who's not there, I apologise there's something like 80 questions still in the box. We can't get to everybody, but we have to sort of finish up. Perhaps I'll just ask one question that I'm sorry I can't let go. And it is directed towards you, Rob, from Peter Paul von Wheeler, and it is a very important question. And it says, I would consider you more a Marmite man than a Vegemite man. Has living in Australia mingled your mind?
It has. When I first came over here, I worked for Kraft, and I hated Vegemite. And the brand team gave it to me in every single meeting that I went to. And so I went through the process that Australian babies go through when you precondition them to Vegemite very early. I had to do that in my late 20s. It was painful, but I've forgiven the country for that. And I love living here. And yeah, I do love Vegemite now. Thank you.
Oh, thank goodness for that. I was super worried for a second there. Tony, I might just wrap up. I think there's a couple of things. Having had the benefit of seeing this content before the webinar, I understand and have had time to think about it. I think the report's incredible, and the feedback and the information we've got in the Q&A. There are a lot of questions that, that we didn't get to, but my recommendation would be take a look at this report, because it actually will answer many of those questions. We have been truly blessed with the creation of the database, and kudos to the Ad Council and to Tony's leadership for investing the time, getting great people like Rob and Peter and Karen on board to kind of make sure it's rigorous. There is literally nothing like it in the country. I can't speak more highly of, 300 case studies of the best possible, most effective, based on client sales database in the country. So this report is based on that. I would urge you to do two things. One is read the report, and the other one is enter the FEs. Super important so that we keep the health of that database moving forward. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rob, and a shy goodbye to Karen. We have thoroughly enjoyed what you've had to say, and I'm sure that that we'll be hearing more from both of you, all three of you, in the future.
And thank you from me to Rob, Peter and Karen, and thanks for everybody. We've still got a couple of hundred people viewing, which is quite extraordinary. It just shows that a lot of the questions and the content that we're talking about is really, really important. So thank you for everybody for your time, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.